So the House voted today to pass the so-called Corona 3.5 stimulus package, which again doesn't do nearly enough to actually help out the most vulnerable. Again, we've lost 26 million people have lost their jobs since mid-March. Record numbers of people, filing for unemployment. Our economy is completely just tanking in every metric, and this bill does nothing really to address any of these underlying issues. So it gives money for the Paycheck Protection Act. It gives money for hospitals, which, if you're going to be giving money to private hospitals, then the taxpayer, the U.S. government, should be getting an equity stake in those hospitals. We shouldn't just be throwing money at these for-profit, hospitals that are, price gouging people for these services and everything like that. If any private company, besides, these small businesses, are getting money from the government, then there needs to be strings attached. And then it also provides some money for testing, which is good, but the things that it doesn't include are, really, frankly, disturbing. And no member of Congress or the Senate, as far as progressives go, stood up and voted against it, except AOC. I will give her credit this time. She rolled over on that third stimulus package. She voted for that after giving this fiery speech, on the floor of the House. But kudos to her. She stood her ground and said that this bill doesn't do nearly enough to help out the working people, to help out the most vulnerable and marginalized who have been impacted by this, coronavirus pandemic and the subsequent economic crisis. So kudos to AOC. But who has it, or who supported this? Bernie, Warren, Ilhan Omar, Ro Khanna, Ayanna Pressley, all of these members, of the so-called progressive wing of the Democratic Party, both in the House and the Senate, have completely, in my opinion, abdicated any type of, responsibility to try to actually get these adequate measures passed that, frankly, we really need. An emergency UBI. This bill, there's no type of stimulus, no UBI, nothing for rent or mortgage cancellations or freezes, no money for states or cities or municipalities that are really struggling right now, who have seen their revenues drop dramatically. There's no money for food stamps. There's nothing about any type of bailout for the post office, which would be going bankrupt pretty soon if they don't get some, cash from the federal government because of how they have to fund their workers' retirements like 50 years into the future, which is something no other federal, agency has to do, and it's, very burdensome, and they're the only ones who have this placed upon them, so that's why they're in these financial straits to begin with. Nothing about, voting by mail or protecting our, elections, because how are we going to expect people to go out and vote in the fall when this stuff might still be going on? We obviously need a universal system in the U.S. where people are able to vote by mail. Nothing for food stamps. Oh, and then also nothing about hazard pay for all these frontline workers, or all these people who are literally having to put their lives on the line in order to keep our world going, to keep us fed. So, the grocery store workers, people at Amazon, people at USPS, people at UPS, sanitation workers, cleaning staff, all of these people who are still having to work during this, they should be getting paid at least double. So this bill, Jesus fucking Christ. What's the point of electing people like Bernie Sanders or Ilhan Omar or Elizabeth Warren, even though I don't know why we'd still be considered her progressive, but some people still lump her in with that group. What's the point of electing these so-called progressives to the House and the Congress if they're just going to completely roll over and show no backbone when it really matters. Why would you not stand up and fight to try to get these really important things included in this so-called, 3.5 stimulus, plan that was just passed? And again, kudos to AOC. She was the only dissenting voice that actually stood her ground. She said if this bill didn't get better, she would vote against it, and it looks like that's what actually happened. But where are you at, Bernie? You talk a good game, but it seems like when the going gets tough, you just go along with the party establishment. When you go along with the establishment and try to protect the status quo with regards to these stimulus plans, the working people, the most vulnerable and marginalized, are going to be impacted, and they're getting nothing. Again, it's like, what's the fucking point of electing so-called progressive if they're not actually going to stand up and fight for progressive values to make sure the working people, to make sure the most vulnerable and marginalized in the United States actually are getting taken care of during this economic and public health crisis that we're experiencing due to the coronavirus pandemic. Again, 26 million people have lost their jobs in the United States since mid-March, and those are only the ones who have filed for unemployment. So in reality, the number is probably over 30 million, if not more than that. And again, it needed to include rent and mortgage cancellations for the duration of this crisis, emergency UBI, bailout of USPS, voting by mail, expanded food stamps, hazard pay for all frontline workers. I mean, it's not that difficult. These things are pretty common sense, and I mean, Bernie has talked about, wanting to get those things done, but it's like, okay, then don't fucking vote, don't support this if it actually doesn't go far enough to actually help out the people that need it the most. It's ridiculous. We actually need to start electing leaders on the left who actually stand up and fight for what they claim to be important things, like taking care of people during a fucking pandemic. Kind of seems important about worrying about the people most affected by this, instead of just going along with the party leadership and voting along party lines to support another completely inadequate bill that, again, does really nothing to help out the people that need it the most. The Paycheck Protection Act, yes, that's good, but again, doesn't do nearly enough. We needed to address all of these other issues that I just laid out, and it didn't. So kudos to AOC for being I think the only member of Congress who actually voted against it, because in her mind, and I think that's she made the correct conclusion there, that this bill does not go far enough to help out the people that actually need it. So kudos to AOC, and shame on all the so-called other progressive members of Congress who just went along to get along and showed again that they really have no, frankly, backbone or spine to stand up and fight when it really matters. And we need to start electing people who actually are willing to do that. Peace. Much love.